Georg Karo traced his fingers along the edge of the ancient gold mask, its cold surface reflecting the flickering light of his oil lamp. The Mycenaean death mask stared back with hollow eyes, as if mocking his efforts to understand the civilization that had created it. He had spent years meticulously documenting Grave Circle A, publishing findings from Schliemann's excavations that others had neglected. What began as scholarly work had become an obsession, and now, as the Nazi regime tightened its grip on Germany, Karo found himself haunted by something far older than political persecution. The first dream came on a cold November night in 1935, as Karo prepared to leave his position as director of the German Archaeological Institute in Athens. In his sleep, he stood before a massive stone circle, the same one he had excavated at Mycenae. But in the dream, the circle pulsed with an unnatural light, and shadowy figures emerged from the graves, figures with eyes that burned like embers. They spoke without words, their meaning seeping directly into his mind. "You have disturbed our rest. Now you will never rest." Karo woke drenched in sweat, his heart pounding against his ribs. He dismissed it as stress. After all, the pressure from Berlin to resign was mounting, his Jewish ancestry making him increasingly vulnerable despite his years of service to German archaeology. But the dreams returned, each more vivid than the last. He began seeing figures in the periphery of his vision, tall, gaunt shapes that vanished when he turned to face them directly. His colleagues noticed his growing distraction, the dark circles beneath his eyes, the way his hands trembled when handling the ancient artifacts. One afternoon, while examining a particularly ornate dagger from Grave Circle A, Karo cut his finger on the bronze blade. As his blood dripped onto the artifact, something extraordinary happened. The dagger grew warm in his hands, and for a brief moment he saw not the Athens of 1935 but a Mycenaean funeral procession, the mourners chanting in a language he somehow understood. They spoke of a covenant broken, of guardians who had failed, of a darkness that would follow those who disturbed the sacred dead. The realization struck him like lightning. This was no ordinary archaeological site. The grave circle was not merely a burial ground but a prison, designed to contain something ancient and terrible. The Mycenaeans had placed powerful wards within the graves, warnings inscribed in symbols Karo had previously interpreted as mere decoration. Now he understood they were not decorations but barriers, and by documenting and publishing the findings, he had unwittingly weakened those barriers. As if to confirm his fears, strange occurrences multiplied. Artifacts would be found in different positions from where they had been stored. The photographs he developed showed shadowy figures standing among the excavation team. One morning, he discovered footprints in the dust of his office, prints that matched no known Mycenaean footwear but bore an uncanny resemblance to the bronze greaves found in the graves. The political situation worsened simultaneously. Letters arrived from Berlin demanding his resignation. Friends in the institute whispered about the coming purge of Jewish scholars. Karo tried to focus on his work, believing that if he could decipher the full meaning of the grave goods, he might find a way to restore the ancient wards and lift whatever curse he had awakened. Then came the day he found the inscription. Hidden beneath layers of corrosion on a bronze breastplate was a series of symbols he had never noticed before. As he carefully cleaned the artifact, the symbols seemed to shift and rearrange themselves before his eyes. They formed words in a Proto-Greek dialect: "The darkness follows the blood. It cannot be outrun." Karo understood immediately. The curse wasn't just following him, it was bound to his bloodline, to his very essence. His Jewish heritage, the same ancestry that made him a target for the Nazis, had somehow made him vulnerable to this ancient evil. The parallels became impossible to ignore. Both forces sought to erase him, one through modern political machinery, the other through supernatural means. As the Nazi pressure intensified, Karo made plans to flee. He contacted his American colleagues Blegen and Hill, arranging passage to the United States. But the entity from the graves would not be left behind. The night before his departure, he awoke to find his bedroom filled with a thick, unnatural mist. From the mist emerged figures, skeletal warriors in bronze armor, their eyes glowing with that same ember-like light. They didn't attack him. Instead, they stood watch as if waiting. Karo realized the terrible truth: the Nazis were not his only pursuers. The entity from the graves had claimed him as its own, and it would follow him wherever he went. The ancient curse and modern persecution were two sides of the same coin, both sought to destroy him but for different reasons. One wanted his blood to complete some ancient ritual, the other wanted his blood erased from the historical record. On the ship to America, Karo watched the Greek coastline fade into the distance, but he felt no relief. The entity was with him, he could sense it in the ship's lower decks, a presence that made the crew uneasy without understanding why. In his cabin, he opened his journal to a blank page and began to write not scholarly observations but desperate instructions. He would document everything he had learned, hoping that if he could not save himself, perhaps someone else could break the cycle. The nightmares continued across the Atlantic. In Cincinnati, then Oberlin, then Claremont, Karo worked feverishly, trying to decipher the final pieces of the puzzle. He noticed that the entity's presence grew stronger around certain historical moments, whenever Germany invaded another country, whenever concentration camps expanded their operations. The ancient evil fed on human suffering, and the Nazi regime provided an endless banquet. One evening, while examining a photograph of Grave Circle A, Karo saw something that made his blood run cold. In the background of the image, barely visible, stood a figure in a Nazi uniform, watching the excavation. But this was impossible. The photograph had been taken in 1933, before Karo's dismissal, before the Nazis had any official presence at the site. The realization struck him with terrifying clarity. The entity had been manipulating events long before he disturbed the graves. It had guided the rise of the Nazi regime, using human hatred as a tool to create the suffering it craved. His Jewish blood hadn't just made him a target, it had made him a key in some ancient mechanism, a living link between past and present horrors. Karo understood now what he must do. The final ritual wasn't about protection or escape, it required sacrifice. To break the connection between ancient evil and modern tyranny, someone with his blood must willingly return to the graves, must offer themselves to whatever waited there. Not as a victim, but as a conduit through which the evil could be contained once more. As he packed his belongings for his return to Germany in 1952, Karo felt a strange peace. The entity would follow him back to Mycenae. It had waited millennia for this moment. But this time, the archaeologist would not be the unwitting disturber of graves, he would be the willing guardian, the final ward against the darkness. The ship cut through the Mediterranean waters, carrying him toward his destiny. In his cabin, Karo opened his journal one last time and wrote a single phrase in ancient Greek: "I return to where I belong." Outside, the sea grew unnaturally calm. From the depths, something ancient stirred, sensing the approach of the one who carried both the blood of the persecuted and the knowledge of the dead. The circle was about to close.